Welcome to Easy Style with Sammy. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each episode, I invite a friend, family member, colleague, or just someone I've met on this journey called life to come and share their personal style and approach to business, parenting, life, and everything in between. You'll hear motivational and inspirational stories that will help you refine and build your own personal style. Remember, style is easy when it comes from within. Hey, welcome to another episode of Easy Style with Sammy. Today, my guest is the wonderful Katy Ipock. Katy, thanks for being here today.
I am so stoked to be here.
So I think we met at a networking event when I was living in Oregon and just connected immediately. Like, I love your energy. I love the way that you just want to bring people together. You just want to build community. Like, you're just all about, like, how can I help you? Like, that's just the energy that you exude. And so I feel like it's been easy. Like, we've just had kind of an easy off, we connect sometimes we're not chatting as often, but we always just seem to come back like no time has passed.
Right? It's like our friendship has an easy style.
Oh, that was okay. You guys are going to learn through this. She's a comedian and a promotions person, so she's going to know all of the things to say here. But speaking of that, you've had like 90 different titles. So you've been a producer, you're a comedian, you're a mom, you're a wife, you've been a radio host, you've been a podcast host, you've been a comedian coach. I'm missing probably 800 of them. But kind of, how has that felt for you? Like, how have you ebbed and flowed through that? How have you made decisions about what to do, what not to do? Like, what does that look like for you just in a big picture strategy?
Well, I suppose in the big picture, almost all of my other titles have come from starting stand-up comedy. Before stand-up, I did go to school for radio broadcasting. I'm a graduate of American Broadcasting School, which is a tech school.
Nice.
And then right about the time I graduated from ABS, we learned that our son is autistic, and that became like a real focus. And so everything got put to the side. And then I just tried stand-up comedy, honestly, to get out of the house. And that kind of turned into an amazing hobby that got me out. And then through that, I got offered a couple of radio shows that I said yes to say yes. It was a lot of just saying yes to say yes. Almost all of those titles. Mm-hmm. And I think the big transition for me was the pandemic, when almost everything got taken off my plate. And it was one of those moments where everything I was putting my time into, other than my family, was taken away. And when it came time to put stuff back on the plate, I had a clear vision of what was filling my soul and what was just taking energy away. What was I doing just because it was habit to say yes? And what was I doing to please other people?
Yep.
So post-pandemic, it just became a gut check every time. Is this, if it's not an ecstatic yes, I want to do this, then I really needed to evaluate it, whether I wanted to bring it back.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think a lot of us feel that way. And I think that's great. But I want to jump to what you said at the beginning, which is I started comedy just to get out of the house and do something.
Yes.
Because like for 99% of the population, like that is terrifying. So like how has like comedy always been something you've enjoyed doing? Like how is that something you're like, I'll just try getting on stage and telling jokes and like trying to make people laugh? I mean, like, that's hard.
Yeah, no. So when people, because I get that a lot of time, people asking me about stage fright and how are you brave enough to do it? I think a lot of people don't understand where stage fright comes from. And it's actually encoded into our like DNA. And it comes from back when we would have to be able to sleep by the fire in order to survive at night. And in order to be allowed to sleep around the fire, everyone else had to like you. So it came down to there's a survival need to not embarrass yourself, not to make people angry. And that's where stage fright is. And that's why people are almost more afraid of stage fright than they are death.
Yeah.
Because they don't realize stage fright really is fearing death. I say that saying that I don't have that instinct. So if this was 2-3 millennia ago or whenever, I probably would have been cast from the fire and eaten by a lion by the time I was like 12. Yeah. So terrifying. It's not, actually, I mean, it's a good thing in society now in a way, but like, I'm just missing a part of that instinct for self-preservation.
Why don't you call yourself you've evolved past the need?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, that too, for sure. That is the less humorous way to look at it. But yeah, no, it's, but that's why, like, I don't overly pressure people that are like, oh my God, so much stage fright, I don't want to do it. Like, I get it. You want to live, you want to survive, you don't want to be eaten by the lion. Like, that's actually a mentally healthy place to be. It's not the bad thing that people think it is.
Well, and that's why you're great at what you do. So like when you started doing comedy, because you have a very adult style of comedy.
Yes.
And so has that always been a part of your mix? And like, how does that kind of play into your confidence to just show up and be 100% you? Because there's one thing to be like, I'm not afraid to show up, but then there's another thing to be like, I'm going to be me and you like me or you don't. These are my jokes. This is my humor. This is my style. And I'm going for it.
Yeah. So I think part of it is because of the reason I got into stand-up in the first place. And we'll back up. I guess we're backing up to this twice, but whatever. So before I started stand-up comedy, I was doing some line dancing, but I wasn't really getting out of the house. And I've always had what I politely call a performer's heart. And even as a young kid, I loved to be in front of the class and talking. And I did speech and debate in high school. And I've always loved that attention. And I know everyone else calls it being an attention whore. I call it having a performer's heart.
There you go.
And so, right. And as a mom, that was not getting itched. That was not, I had basically gone too long without attention from strangers. And I was wanting it. I was thirsty for it. And I saw an ad for an open mic and I just did it. But the thing is, it was, and it still is, my break from motherhood. Mm-hmm. It is my break from being the full-time caregiver for a child with special needs. And so it is where I go to be adult. It is where I go to be unapologetic. It is where I go to be.
It's your version of self-care.
Yeah. And like, it's where I go to be a little less empathetic and a little less compassionate and a little, And so I think that comes out in how I write, because it's really the therapy and the antithesis from, the way I spend the rest of my time otherwise.
As the caregiver. Well, because as moms, I think, and wives, like we feel this caregiver role so much. And so I think we all need to find that release, that outlet that allows us to let that go. And yours happens to be comedy, which I think is great. At what age will you allow your son to watch your shows?
So the thing about my son, bless him, and I don't know how much of your audience will relate to this, but my son is what you call a scripter. So instead of functional language, which is getting better, he's 13 now, he takes a sentence that he learns, honestly, usually from YouTube, and just yells it at people. And even though he is a scripter, he's always been very quick to kind of figure out technology. So his scripts have actually never been that appropriate. So while I am not purposely sitting him in front of my material, at this point, we haven't really had the luxury of policing content in our house.
It's hard. It's so hard.
I do what I can.
My son will come up and show me some YouTube shorts that just pop up on his feed, even though we have like all of the things in place. And, you have to have those conversations with your kids no matter what all the time. It's hard to control without just being like a tyrant and saying you can't do any of it.
Yeah. He, every once in a while I'll get a text from his school where they'll be like, hey, he's scripting something new, and they type it out. And it usually has one or more colorful metaphors.
Yes.
And then I have to Google it and figure out, and then be like, well, this is where it's from. basically confirming to the school that I didn't teach him to say that myself. And then
not a common phrase in our household.
yeah, and adding it to the block list, and but you can't get ahead of it anymore.
Yeah.
You just
Well, speaking of social media, I want to go back to the comedy because I know this is something you and I have talked about a while ago, but cancel culture, conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, around race, around LGBTQ plus, which I know you're a huge supporter and advocate for. How has that affected comedians and like what you write and how you tell jokes? Because there's now that like that fine line has become like a sidewalk that you have to try to navigate between like what's a joke and what's being offensive.
Yep. I am a firm believer as a whole that it's not cancel culture. It is consequence culture. And honestly, we talk about how comedy is my break from caregiving, but I have turned into a mentor and a trainer for comics. And basically what I explain to them is you can't punch down. And what punching down in comedy, and I imagine everywhere else, it means writing a joke where the punchline makes fun of somebody who has less social or economic power than you do. So as a white straight woman, I can punch up on straight white men all I want.
Yeah.
All day. But women of color, men of color, anyone within the LGBT plus community, like the moment I write a punchline that makes fun of them, that's when I've crossed a line. That's not to say that I can't write about LGBT issues or issues with communities of color or priority communities. It just means you can't punch down on them.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've never understood the backlash to that thought process. And you get a lot of comedians that come back with, what about comics like George Carlin? And I'm like, if you listened, he never punched down. It may have been edgy. It may have been, speaking truth to power, but that was the point. He was speaking truth to power.
Well, and I think you also have to take it within the context of the time, right? Like it's not fair to take movies or comedy or songs or anything that's in the entertainment space out of context of the time that it existed, because how are they
oh yeah,
you have to be the best version of yourself in the moment that you're in and do right by you. And I love that because it's almost like stay in your lane. It's like I can learn, advocate, and support these other communities that I am not in, but that doesn't mean that because I'm an advocate for those communities I have the right to make jokes or create commentary around those in a public space.
Yeah, exactly. It's just doing what comedians have not really been asked to do, and that's not use your platform to harm.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can put an asterisk to that, not harm, people with less social and economic power than you have. Let's harm all the super rich straight white dudes that take advantage of everybody else. Like let's take down Elon Musk. I'm all down for that. But like
and do you think that has come like, because I know you do mentor a lot of comedians, but like, do you think your style has developed and the way that you mentor has developed as you have gotten older, and like you see kind of like, I guess, twofold question, like your maturity helps you kind of understand what's right and wrong in those situations, but like in your years of mentoring, like how are you seeing even just the awareness and understanding from maybe some younger comedians now that if you were mentoring the same aged comedian 10 years ago, like wouldn't be the same? Like, are you seeing growth there?
I think growth and awareness as a whole, and that's among the entire society.
Yeah.
I think anyone that is looking at any sort of expression the same way post BLM and post the pandemic has lost the point.
Yeah.
Comedy has changed. What's acceptable has changed. And it should not have taken the BLM movement for us to see this, but that's what happened.
That's what it takes to make social change in any situation, right? A traumatic.
Right. And it's unfortunate and it's heartbreaking. And there are some people who are not stepping through and joining the rest of the society and the idea that it's time to elevate.
Yeah.
But in terms of writing, there is a trajectory that almost all comics take. So your first couple years, you write what we call low-hanging fruit jokes. It's very jokes about penises. Everyone has jokes about internet dating sites.
Yep.
It's all, in the 80s and 90s, we would have called them airplane jokes and mother-in-law jokes. And part of that is because you're learning the nuts and bolts of how writing a joke works.
Yeah.
And it's easier to learn how to do something with stuff that's already inherently funny. But you find after a couple years, 2-3 years, if anybody, and this is myself included, is really interested in the craft and really learning, you start to see a change where they start to move away from the low-hanging fruit and they start to kind of get away from vulgarity for vulgarity's sake.
Yeah, for the shock factor, right?
Yeah, and they start to write from a more mature perspective. And that's where you start to see comics go from writing about internet dating to start writing about stuff that's really important to them and really insightful. And comedy as a whole, like comedy audiences, what they want is different now than pre-pandemic. And Hannah Gatsby is a really good example of that. So if you watch her Netflix special, you'll see that it ebbs and flows in and out of comedy into storytelling. And comedians who have not joined us in this post-pandemic world say that her special isn't comedy. That's not stand-up comedy. That's not even what that is. But audiences loved it. And it's because she got honest. Audiences want you to rip open your chest. They want you to show them your wounds. And the potentially mentally unhealthy thing is they want to be able to laugh at them.
Yeah.
Right.
But wait, let me stop you there, because I think the beauty of comedy is that, to your point with the storytelling and kind of that arc, and what I love is when all of a sudden you're listening to something and then they go on these tangents and then they come all the way full circle and bring it and close it up and put this nice little ribbon on it, and you're just laughing your butt off. But I think that it's also we're laughing at it because it's somebody talking about something we've experienced and making us feel okay, maybe I'm not so weird. Oh, that happened to me. That's why it's funny. It's not because you made a joke.
Oh yeah, exactly. What I meant was unhealthy is for us as comics.
Oh, right.
I don't know if I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I can't imagine co-signing the idea of looking at your trauma in a way to get strangers to laugh at it in front of you. That can't be totally cool on the brain, but it's also really therapeutic.
Yeah, but it's self-awareness. If you can talk about it, people that have trauma they can't deal with can't talk about it.
That's true. I talk about mine a lot, so you have a point.
I love it. Well, I want to touch on one thing before we kind of get into the last questions that I always ask everybody, and that is, before we got on this call, you mentioned, you've been touring more, you've been doing more stand-up shows, and hit or miss, right? You had a couple good shows, you had a show that everything didn't quite land the way you wanted. So what does that feel like, and how do you resist the urge to just say, oh, well, this show sucked? Let's just say 1 of 3 shows sucked. So you did better than you did poor. I don't know what the right word is there. How do you resist the urge to be I'm just scrapping it all and I'm starting all from scratch, versus having the confidence to say, no, these jokes are good. That just wasn't the right audience, time, or place.
Right. So what you're talking about, that whole thing is what probably drives 80+% of people out of stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
It's not anything other than the battle with yourself to be able to work through what we call a bomb. Dave Attell once said, you have to bomb 100 times to be a comedian, and you have to learn how to enjoy that ride down. So you have to be able to stand in front of an audience that isn't enjoying your jokes and figure out how not to let it eat your soul and find some joy, but also you never want to blame the audience for a bad set. So, for example, I had a show Saturday where the majority of that set went great. And then I went down a road they were not a fan of. Yeah. And looking back on it, I just should have been oh, we're not liking this topic. I should switch gears. Instead, I got a little egotistical and was oh, we're just going to keep talking about this because you guys will get on board eventually. They never got on board. And I should have switched gears. but you don't become a better performer until you put yourself through those situations. You know, it reminds me a lot of what my stepdad, who's a 35-year National Ski Patrol, or when he talks about skiing, he says, if you're not falling, you're not becoming a better skier. Same thing with anything, but comedy specifically. You know, that bomb makes me a better comic today.
And I agree with that, because I have launched products in my marketing business that have bombed, but that doesn't mean I shut down my business. We just like pivoted and moved on. Like we've held live. Like I think in any industry, whatever you're doing, you know, if you're giving a presentation, like it doesn't mean you need to stop. It just, I think, like you said, it's all about self-awareness and but like knowing, I think for you, right, you know, at your core, you love what you do. And if you didn't have that, then that wouldn't keep pushing you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think if I did not enjoy being in front of an audience and watching them every time react to what I'm telling them, and honestly, all comedians we're emotional manipulators, just like the bad ones. The only difference is we're just trying to manipulate you into positive emotions. I'm trying to emotionally manipulate you to get you to laugh. That's why nobody calls us toxic, but it's pretty much the same thing. And so I enjoy that. I enjoy the idea of getting an entire room to laugh at the same time. It might be a little sadistic, but I love it.
But this is why you're great at what you do. We all choose the path, or we should choose the path for ourselves that makes the most sense to light us up. Like you said, post-pandemic, it was like, what am I going to say yes to? I'm going to say yes to the things that light me up and let go of the things that don't.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go through the 5 questions that I ask every guest that's on the podcast. So where's your go-to place for personal development learning or career learning? Like, where do you go to find support?
Support, I go to open mics. I go to the community where other people who do the same thing I do. But I also find Pinterest to be an amazing resource for inspiration and, you know, where to find personal development books and that sort of thing.
I love that. You'll have to follow Easy Style with Sammy on Pinterest for additional resources.
Nice.
Shameless plug. Yeah. Okay. Are you I think we know the answer to this, but would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
I am an introvert.
Oh, wait, what?
Hands down. I am a textbook introvert. My energy does not get refueled by being around people. And I think people have a misunderstanding of stand-up comedians. The majority of stand-up comedians are introverts. And I think you can assume that by the nature of what stand-up comedy is, that it's an extrovert activity, but it's really not, because you have extra space and you're in control of that conversation. It's not one-on-one. You're controlling what's being said. No one can really talk back to you. It's so yeah, it's not as extroverted as you think it is.
You know, it's interesting because my daughter is in theater and she takes voice lessons, but if you asked her to like have a conversation and sing in front of you, or sing like just next to you, or like have a little whatever powwow, what's the word? Have like a jam session or something. Right. Never going to happen. But you put her on stage with the lights, same like what you said, like that separation between you and the audience. She doesn't actually have to interact with anybody. But it lights her up because she loves to perform on stage. So that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. What's one thing that's on your goal list for this upcoming year, either personal or professional?
So writing my next 45-minute set. So I
45 minutes.
Yep. I released an album last year. It was my debut album, self-produced, Motor Yacht. Find it on all streaming services. And so now the goal is to write the next 45 minutes. So that's what I'm working on this year.
That's awesome. And we'll link that up in the show notes too, so people can find it. What is a piece of advice you've gotten from someone that has stuck with you?
I think it's that piece of advice from my stepdad about how when you're skiing, if you're not following, you're not learning.
Yeah. Yep. Failure is not failure unless you let it be, right?
Nope.
Yep. Correct. Okay, last one. What is a non-negotiable for you in your life?
You can't work in stand-up comedy and really have a non-negotiable. But I guess for me at this point, I cannot be around people who punch down in any way anymore, whether it be in their writing, or you can even punch down like that in real life, in the way you walk through your life. I can't be around that anymore.
Yep. Well, I so appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I appreciate you being a positive energy and positive light for people because you practice what you preach and you do that in your comedy, but also in the way that you mentor people. And I just think that's such a gift to people.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for being an awesome human. Katy, if people want to learn more about you, if they happen to be in the Central Oregon area or in Oregon and want to check out your shows, how can they connect with you?
The best place to go would be my website. It's katyipock.com, KatyIpock.com. And that you can find links to all of my social media, upcoming shows, different podcast interviews, and that kind of stuff. Just everything Katy is right there.
Everything, Katy. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been a blast.
Of course. Thank you, Sammy.
So, what'd you think? Is Katy awesome or what? I just love her take and approach to all the things in her life and the way she approaches comedy and how she mentors people and has her own style that not everybody might like or maybe people are going to love, but it's hers. And she does it with respect and she does it with care and she does it most importantly to light her up. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us as we think about the choices that we make in crafting our own style when it comes to our work-life balance, family, all of the things. So head on over to the show notes at easystylewithsammy.com/10 to grab the resources and things that she discussed in this episode. Or you can stream wherever you listen or check us out on YouTube at Easy Style with Sammy if you want to watch the video versions of these episodes. New episodes release on Thursday. So I hope you'll leave us a review and subscribe wherever you watch and or listen so that you don't miss out on a single episode. Thank you so much for being loyal fans of Easy Style with Sammy. We're 10 episodes in and I'm having a blast having these conversations and I hope that you're being inspired by them as well. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode and I'll see you in the next one.